The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, everyone. Good afternoon or good morning, depending on where you're listening from. My name is Victoria Vital. I'm a Junior Program Officer of the ICLEI World Congress 2018, and I will be moderating this webinar. Thank you all for joining. This is the second of our preparatory webinar series towards the ICLEI World Congress 2018, taking place from the 19th to the 22nd of June in Montreal, Canada. The topic that brings us together today is bridging the gap between cities and research for sustainability. As we all know, cities and regions are facing major climate risks due to increasingly more severe and threatening natural events, and decision makers need data and science-driven sustainability and climate policies to guide targeted and efficient local action. The objective today is to discuss the challenges and opportunities of collaboration between researchers and practitioners for policymaking in sustainable urban development. I would like to thank all of our speakers, and I would now proceed with a brief presentation of each one of them. Andrés Beltrán, he is an engineer in climate change and spatial projects from the Environmental Department of the Planning and Environmental Monitoring Division of the City of Montreal. And Andrés will be speaking on using the city as climate change and adaptation laboratory. He will be followed by Melissa Colbert, who is a science officer of urban projects from Future Earth. She will speak on the role of research networks in shaping sustainable policies and boosting local governments' global engagement. Yunus Arikan, our head of global policy and advocacy at ICLEI, will speak on the ICLEI and Cities IPCC conference connecting local governments and climate science. Yunus will be followed by Melissa Guardaro, who is a PhD student from the School of Sustainability and graduate fellow of the Urban Resilience to Extreme Sustainability Research Network at the Arizona State University, who will be speaking on the Cooler Phoenix Initiative, city research collaboration for science-based urban heat solutions. And finally, Joseph Bladkowski, our head of the ICLEI Global Capacity Center at ICLEI, will present the cities and research opportunities at the ICLEI World Congress 2018. I will now give the floor to Andrés.
Okay.
Please, Andrés.
Okay, good morning. One moment, please. Okay, it's okay. Good morning, everybody. I am Andrés Beltrán. I'm engineer in climate change team and environment department at Vida Montel. I will speak about the series as a climate change adaptation laboratory. To begin, I will speak about the characteristics of our territory. So, the Montreal urban agglomeration is a large island with an area of 500 square kilometers. It is composed of 16 municipalities, including the ville de Montreal. It has a population of about 2 million people. Close to 90% of the agglomeration land is urbanized. Most of the island is devoted to residential areas. It's okay? Hi? It's okay?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, sorry. 29% the area is residential, while 8% of the land is made up of commercial areas. Industrial areas also occupy 8% of the space. The population density varies greatly from one place to another on the island. The population is concentrated in the center of the island, so there is a high density. On the eastern and western sides of the island, there are more suburban types of neighborhoods with a lower density. So the diversity of the Montreal territory requires a big variety of adaptation measures. For that, In 2013, the Ville de Montreal committed on behalf of the agglomeration to producing a climate change adaptation plan. To do that, first of all, we identified the climate hazards of Montreal agglomeration based on historic climate events covering the last 30 years and on climate projections made by the experts on regional climatology whose name is Uranus. So the hazards identified are higher average temperatures, heavy rainfalls, heat waves, destructive storms, droughts, and river floods. When the hazards were identified, we made a list of the known and potential impacts of climate change in Montreal, including these impacts that emerged when we reviewed the extreme climate events that have occurred over the last 30 years. These impacts are grouped into four categories: built environment, natural environment, socioeconomic issues, and municipal operations. To complete the list of impacts and evaluate their significance, we submit the list to collaborators identified as specialists in their fields, including the socioeconomic issues. Please note that we involved stakeholders from the start of the project, and we identified the effort already undertaken, including measures already in place. With all this information, we carry out a geographic vulnerability analysis for the 6 climate hazards. The methodology we developed was adapted from the one used by 2 researchers for Uranus, the Consortium on Regional Climatology. Finally, all the municipalities of Montreal urban agglomeration committed to implementing climate change adaptation measures in order to reduce the vulnerabilities identified in the territory, and the plan was published in 2015. Later, in June 2017, the Ville de Montreal announced a partnership with Uranus. Uranus is a non-profit organization that develops and coordinates projects by tapping into a network of approximately 450 researchers, experts, practitioners, and policymakers from a variety of disciplines in Quebec. Their mission: acquire and develop knowledge on climate change and its impacts, as well as relevant socioeconomic and environmental vulnerabilities, to help policymakers identify, evaluate, promote, and implement national, regional, and local adaptation strategies. So, this partnership will help Montreal meet the challenges of climate change adaptation, bringing together research and implementation in accordance with Montreal's needs. In detail, the objectives of the partnerships are bridge research efforts and the needs of the city, which must manage climate change and apply adaptation concepts throughout the territory, share expertise, and circulate knowledge and data. Create leverage for innovation by implementing various integrated adaptation research and development initiatives covering a range of subjects, from climate projections to economic analysis. For us, it's a win-win situation because the ville can develop the internal expertise and has access to the consortium's tools, knowledge, and vast network of experts. For Uranus, is an opportunity, among others, to connect the science to practice, to work with frontline experts, leading to the sharing of knowledge and expertise, to test knowledge and tools developed on the ground, to go beyond modeling, to have access to human resources and ground-level expertise in several fields, including weather management, landscape design, economic development, and more. In the main, to better understanding of the municipal reality and the practice of citizenry. So, This win-win formula that will permit to create integrated research and development programming for adaptation that covers various subjects and targets, all in order to increase the capacity of municipal agents to strengthen the city's resilience in the context of a changing climate. This partnership aims to be a locus for action and thinking citywide, and so, by definition, an interdisciplinary slash intersectorial space built on collaboration and openness to viewpoints from many disciplines. It will support projects that aim to integrate climate change adaptation into planning, design, and construction as a complement to the bill's other ongoing activities and programs. So, to finish, quickly I will present you two examples of projects in development. The first one, the Climate Living Lab, it consists of converting the convent complex into housing projects multi-purpose, like community and private housing, workshop, and office, as well as services such as local shops. Construction of a new building in order to relocate the news on the site, the preservation and enhancement of green space, including a section converted into a municipal public park representing around 20% of the land. The creation of Climate Living Lab for climate change adaptation is a co-creative process for researching and implementing adaptation solutions. This process will consist of bringing together many services to analyze a planning process based on very specific project, or to explore a completely different project management model in order to see how climate change adaptation can be integrated into the various steps of a project development. The second one, the economic analysis, consists to innovate strategies to rehabilitate, requalify, and modernize brownfields or aging industrial parks. The objective is to develop expertise on the redevelopment of Montreal's former industrial zones by developing more resilient industrial eco-parks in the face of climate change, particularly urban heat island, stormwater management, and sustainable development and construction. In both projects, researchers from various disciplines, public administration, sustainable development operation, engineering, project management, economists will be invited as observers in order not only to analyze every step of the process, but also to document it and means doing develop a process that could be used for subsequent projects with the Ville de Montreal. So voila, the presentation. Thank you. I can hear you.
Thank you, Andres, for your presentation. I would like to invite our participants to send their questions and doubts to the chat. Now I would like to introduce Melissa Colbert, who will speak on the role of research networks in shaping sustainable policies and boosting local governments' global engagement. Thank you, Melissa.
Hi, thank you, Victoria, for the introduction. Just share my screen here. Great, so as Victoria said, my name is Melissa Colbert and I'm a science officer managing urban projects at Future Earth, and I'm based in Montreal, Canada. And as you will have noted from the program, I'll be focusing this part of our discussion today on research networks, or what are sometimes termed knowledge action networks, and the pivotal role they play in working with cities and local governments to shape sustainable policies, in co-creating knowledge to support decision-making, and really working to help boost local government engagement with global agendas like the SDGs, the New Urban Agenda, the Aichi targets, and many others. So just a few years ago in 2015, we experienced a paradigm shift that involved increasing focus on the importance of global sustainability. We saw the approval of the Sendai Framework, the Sustainable Development Goals, and the Paris Agreement. And with this, the world really showed that it was ready to take environmental change seriously. Now, with these goals, frameworks, and agreements that we have, they are ambitious and have the potential to be transformative, but achieving our goals means that it will also take a monumental effort from the entire world to meet these efforts, and to match them, we need equally ambitious strategies, especially when it comes to supporting the efforts of local governments at the local level. So what I've done here for my presentation is I pulled out 5 key areas that I've learned in my experience working in research networks that research networks can really support local governments in their ambitions to contribute to these goals and really improve local engagement with global scale agendas. One of the first ways research networks support local governments in this effort is in their ability to harness local knowledge and give it global weight. In a network, efforts to provide solutions and conduct research and innovation to solve sustainability challenges in cities and local governments, they're coordinated and connected. And this means that a space where collective intelligence can thrive is fostered, and that local knowledge is truly given a global platform. So Future Earth's SDG labs are a great example of this that I thought I'd share with you. These are living laboratories that are micro-scale projects that connect local researchers with local partners to develop sustainable solutions to a challenge that the local region is facing. So they provide seed funding for projects to develop innovative solutions for complex challenges that these regions face. For example, inequality, the global food system, sustainable consumption and production, and ecosystem function in and around urban areas, for example. So these laboratories target areas that are in need of capacity building efforts and where there is a strong willingness and desire to explore sustainable development. So they concretely support the implementation and the exploration of that implementation of the SDGs at the local level with local partners. And then from harnessing and supporting the development of knowledge at the local scale, it is precisely sort of those lessons learned and experience of these many local governments, partners, and examples that are curated and compiled from researchers, experts, practitioners, and local and national governments around the world that feed into making these global assessments, such as the IPC and the IPBES reports. For example, in the case of those SDG labs I shared with you, part of the ambition is to have this knowledge garnered from the experiences within the living labs come to inform recommendations and inputs made at this year's high-level political forum, for example. So these networks, these global networks really do provide global weight for local knowledge, and they really do support policy action around the world at the local scale. The second way I wanted to highlight here that research networks support local governments is research networks actively work with cities to co-create future visions and scenario building in cities to help mitigate risk and adapt to challenges, which is something that Andres' presentation about Uranus also brought up. Another great example to complement that is where there's being developed right now in support of cities this global collaboration called PrEP, Partnership for Resilience Preparedness. So PrEP is a public-private partnership of a few very large tech companies and data institutes around the world, such as Amazon Web Services, Google, NASA, and the World Resources Institute, for example, that have all joined forces on this project to streamline a tool that can be used to support policy and decision-making. And the idea is to take all of the climate data that currently exists, including in these major Earth observation sources like the Group on Earth Observations, and create new dashboards and visualizations that are accessible to governments and communities to understand how to adapt to and mitigate environmental change. So it builds a collective knowledge interface where decision makers have the ability to map forecasts and scenarios for future planning. So the image that I'm showing you here is one example where global population density, which is highlighted in purple, has been overlaid with data on the pace of sea level rise at coastal locations that is displayed here as the blue dots. You'll see the darker the blue dots become, the higher the rates of sea level rise that geographical local region can expect. So having this data in sort of this easily accessible platform format can really help support preparedness in cities. The third way that I wanted to highlight in which research networks can support local governments in improving local engagement with global agendas is through providing inspiration and sparking innovation in cities. So another example I have here is of the Seeds of Good Anthropocenes project, which is a really cool project that emerged from an initiative supported by Future Earth. And it includes researchers from our Eco Services and PEC's global research projects. And the photo that I'm displaying here on the slide on the left, it highlights examples of what are seeds of good Anthropocenes. So you'll see a map of where a number of these seeds, it's just a subset of the over 500 that were submitted, but a number of where these seeds are located around the world. And then below that is an example of one seed. So this photo depicts a march in celebration of the launch of the Gatina Pesa. So this is a launch of a community currency in an area outside of Nairobi. That's essentially money that community members can trade with each other and with local businesses for goods and services. Another example of a seed that I could provide is also an effort in Indonesia, Borneo, that provides low-cost healthcare to people in return for a pledge that they won't engage in deforestation. So this project really does collect these how do we retain hopefulness in a time that seems so unhopeful sometimes, by collecting these experiences at the local level that local and national governments are involved in, and that communities and other societal partners are involved in. It provides a way to for the research network to drive sort of inspiration and innovation that may already exist that can be communicated in that space. Another example is where research networks can actively work to translate and synthesize work and knowledge that may have traditionally only had an outlet, say, in the academic sphere, such as in books, edited volumes, and journal articles. But here, research networks need to really cater to multiple audiences. And it is sort of this collective knowledge, experience, and needs of those diverse communities that can go into shaping and sparking innovation in cities. So prioritizing, finding innovative ways to communicate and work together between science, policy, and society communities is another area that the sort of collective weight and collective power of those within a research networks can really tap into to further this cause in support of efforts being done at the local scale. A fourth way that I wanted to highlight here is the opportunity the research network represents in terms of providing a knowledge base for long-term planning in cities that can help extend the policy life cycle sort of beyond the challenges of just the electoral cycle, and then successfully through successive governments as they change within that policy landscape. So coming from the recent Cities IPCC conference that Eunice will talk on a little bit later, and what I'm sure will continue to be a prominent discussion between the diverse communities at the ICLE World Congress, is this sort of reality that we often operate on different timelines between all of these different communities, and that this presents a challenge for how we work together. So if we are to develop these urban futures that we want, for example, we're going to have to learn to work and co-create along increasingly complex spatial, temporal, and institutional scales. So research networks that take a systems approach to this are sort of well suited to embrace this environment, but it's very important that embracing this complexity and including those challenges and an understanding of those challenges that diverse communities face is sort of taken into consideration so that we can have great success with providing a long-term knowledge base for local governments as they're looking to embrace and work with agendas at the global scale. So the last and final point that I'll discuss here is really one that I think sums up sort of the main goals research networks that are looking to work with cities and co-create solutions with cities really need to focus on. So it's really important that research networks assume the role and really understand that the research and the knowledge conducted in those networks needs to be able to drive action. What we're seeing now today in the world is that we know that science and data alone is not enough. what we really need to be working towards is fostering co-created spaces where the knowledge, needs, and experience of both the local governments and the researchers and scientists communities, where they're working together to drive that action. So we need to develop tools that take science out of the journals and put it in the hands of decision makers so that they can weigh their options against sort of the equally important knowledge they have of their regional landscapes, their local constituents, for example, and of course of those time constraints of the policy example that I was talking about earlier. So it's very important that sort of both of those audiences and communities, the knowledge and needs that they have are prioritized there. And really, with that, we can imagine that by 2030, that we have, if we can learn to sort of co-create in this way, we can have human health and planetary health be sort of the same thing, and have access to sort of clean water and sanitation at the local level by through these collaborations that we've been able to develop between us. If we can make it our imperative within research networks to prioritize both research and action, we can connect in new and profound ways, and we can think differently and act differently. And this is really an imperative for moving forward in the future. So with that, and in closing, I'll say that sort of what I've presented here today is by no means meant to be an exhaustive list, but I really think it serves as a sort of short series of spot highlights to engage us in thinking about what role there is for research networks in working with local governments, and then what some of the opportunities and challenges have been in a few sort of prominent examples I've shared from experiences I've had in research networks. So I thank you all very much for your attention, and I look forward to a later discussion period. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Emlisa, and thank you to all the participants who are sending your questions. We will have some time at the end of the webinar to answer to them. I will now give the floor to Yunus Arikan, our Head of Global Policy and Advocacy here at ICLEI.
Hi, thank you, Victoria, and good morning, good afternoon, all colleagues who have been participating in this exciting webinar. I'm particularly grateful for both the City of Montreal and Melissa to share their experience, and the other speakers. While talking to you, I should just be opening my presentation. Sorry for that confusion from my side. Okay, so I had the honor to join the preparatory phase, also the advocacy of the city's IPCC conference that took place a couple of weeks ago in Edmonton. And this webinar is perfectly timely, both in terms of the scope, which is connecting science and cities, and also connecting to Montreal, because out of Edmonton we have a number of agendas that will conclude in Montreal as well. So before going for the specific outcomes of the conference of the city's IPCC, let me touch very briefly on how ICLEI is referring to the science and evidence in its networks or in its activities. Surprisingly, when we have noticed that being involved in this cities and sustainability area for like 3 decades or so, we have noticed that ICLEI has been particularly pioneering in terms of connecting data to action. This issue of science or taking action in the absence of science is an interesting discussion, because there had been a lot of global difficulties where the national governments have been finding themselves to commit any action without there is any evidence of scientific vigorous, and that was the heart of why IPCC was created in 1988. But it was exactly the same dates, for example, the city of Toronto, when there was no UNFCCC, when there was no carbon dioxide accounting, started to make a commitment of carbon dioxide reduction at the city level. And ICLEI took this in '93 for a global process, turning into a campaign. And now we're operating the global register of city and climate action, carbon climate registry. That is one example of how we are connecting. So in that sense, science and cities are not too much apart from us. The second thing is that our effort to continuously have dialogue with the scientists. And in that sense, the Edmonton conference was interesting because we noticed that ICLEI's first global urban research symposium was part of the World Congress agenda in 2009 in Edmonton. The World Congress held in Edmonton. So Edmonton, in that sense, was another milestone this time to take this discussion beyond ICLEI's network or ICLEI's colleagues, but to a more national government dialogue through IPCC. And since Edmonton, we were also hosting this Resident Cities Congress every year in Bonn that was enabling us to have a debate between urban practitioners, scientists, and policymakers on specifically on resilience. But this was already built a culture for us in how to advance our work on the guidance and how we can guide the city, the scientists that would serve for our needs as local and regional governments. And lastly, the advocacy piece, and which is one of the most important part of it, because in fact, what we have been doing was never enough, and that's why we were asking for a global movement. And this is the connection between climate agenda and the IPCC. For those who are familiar, IPCC is a scientific body, but it is also adopting decisions in consensus with the national government, the negotiators, and the decisions or products of IPCC produces the scientific basis of future political action by the UNFCCC, the UN climate conferences, or decisions of the UN climate conferences are implemented by IPCC research and specific reports. So when 2015 Paris Agreement was adopted, one of the key uniqueness of the Paris Agreement was that it refers to all levels of government in the implementation. It may be a very simple or straightforward, this sentence, all levels of government, but considering that UNFCCC and the Kyoto Protocol have no reference like that to any role of other levels of government, it was revolutionary, and it is still revolutionary. And at the same time Paris Conference was adopted, it was also the first time that the IPCC was led by an urban practitioner, which is Deborah Roberts, who was from eThekwini municipality, Durban, as the co-chair of IPCC. And through her initiatives, the South African government was pushing the agenda of a specific discussion on cities. So in 2016, immediately after Paris Agreement, in fact, the decision to have a specific focus of IPCC was one of the first implementation of Paris Agreement. At that time, the success of this advocacy, where ICLEI was playing a key role in our capacity as focal point of local governments, was that we convinced the negotiators that there's a need for a discussion on cities, but the scientific community within the IPCC have also addressed that there's not enough evidence for further decisions. So the decision was that let's have a spatial report on cities in 2023, which is the 7th assessment report. But now let's kick off a process that is under the authority or auspices of the IPCC, that there should be a clear agenda how we will prepare for this 10 years later, the cities IPCC spatial report. So that is the whole story of the cities IPCC conference. So it was decided in 2016. And it was a 2 years process, and City of Edmonton was a candidate, but the whole process was a co-sponsored workshop or an event of IPCC, but it was supported by a broad diversity of both urban practitioners, local government networks, and scientists and UN institutions. And I'm very happy Future Earth and ICLEI are among those organizations who have contributed in this organization. So with this very short, condensed, let's say, introduction, I can highlight the 3 core outcomes, or let's say group the core outcomes in 3 headings. I will go through the details, some of them. That has been a result of this 3 days conference in Edmonton between 5th to 7th of March. So the first core outcomes is that as this is a co-sponsored workshop of IPCC, the main outcomes should be fed into the IPCC decision-making process. So there was a conclusion about the priorities of a global research agenda on cities and climate change. We will go through it, what it means. This was a result of 3 days of debates, plenary and workshops, and also there was several papers that was commissioned by the organizing committee and the scientific steering committee especially, and this was enriching the debates, which was the whole Congress was attended by more than 600 participants, international participants, plus a couple of hundreds of Canadian partners as well. This was let's say the conclusions will feed into the IPCC, but while the IPCC would be focusing on this and deciding on how to deal with this, the organizations who have been involved in the organization of the conference also stepped up, saying that we do not necessarily organize only the conference itself, but we announce our commitment to take forward, to contribute to continue follow-up on the implementation of the several outcomes, so that by the time we reach to AR7, we are well equipped with all the information and the new research or new initiatives and partnerships and data available. While the IPCC conference was held, was organized, the mayor of Edmonton, in its capacity as the host city, but also very active in global networks like members of ICLE and a number of initiatives like Federation of Canadian Municipalities, have organized a 1 day or 2 days mayor summit as a contribution of the local government leaders to this process. It was not a part of this IPCC, but it demonstrated the key interest of the local government community or political leaders, progressive leaders, how to support or engage in the scientific based policy and decision making. So there was a declaration and there was an announcement. I will come to that again. And the last part is that during the conference there was so many announcements that was announced. I think it was around 10 new products, reports, and initiatives were launched, and one of them was organized by ICLE. It was part of our efforts that during this year, in 2018, there will be a series of Talanoa dialogues to discuss the NDCs and their advancements, and the Canadian version of this will be held in Montreal at the ICLE World Congress. And so that was an opportunity for us to bridge from Edmonton to Montreal again. So these are in a nutshell. Let me go to the first and most priority topic of this presentation, which is what is the global research agenda. And what I can say is that this global research agenda has now 3 main fields, and it was a result of the 4 core themes of the conference, which is science and climate change, cities and climate change, in particular the latest data and the global processes like Paris Agreement and SDGs. Then there was a discussion on urban emissions vulnerabilities. What is the real situation of our urban communities and urban realities? Possible existing solutions in the transition to low carbon cities, and the enabling transformative actions. So out of these 4 themes, the scientific community, the scientific committee of the conference have announced that the future activities, the future scientific and technical research should focus on key areas, in particular when it's focused on cities and climate change. The first one is inclusion and social transformation. This has to focus on justice and equity, power asymmetries and structural barriers, the most vulnerable populations and ecosystems, the challenges and opportunities of informality, innovative forms of governance and institutions. I would like to particularly address this because this is exactly the value of working with the local governments, with the global institutions, because these disadvantaged groups or these topics that can never pop up in intergovernmental processes for a variety of reasons can always be advantages to be dealt when cities are on the radar, because local governments by default are day-to-day serving their people, whether they're registered as a citizen or whether they have an official income, that they have daily needs, they have daily services, they have to be served. And local governments are innovative in terms of finding the appropriate mechanism. So if we want to address that, the climate change has to be the agenda, and climate solutions have to be serving to all populations of the world. The cities are best entry doors. This includes, once again, the urban poors to local indigenous people as well. The second area is the improving evidence-based information. This has to be discussed on boundaries of urban systems, exploring trade-offs and synergies on climate change mitigation adaptation, data scenarios, modeling at the city level, robust climate and urban information, inequity in data gaps, mapping informal settlements, potential benefits of nature-based solutions. And here, let me address one point. As we have mentioned, the global climate action of the local and regional governments have not necessarily started with UNFCCC. We were much advanced, at least those pioneering ones, where ICLEI was part of this movement, and it now improved for hundreds or thousands of cities worldwide. But we still know that there are hundreds of thousands of cities who have not been involved in this process. But during these 3 decades of our climate work, one of our biggest difficulties that because it was not necessarily acknowledged by the global institutions, the data and the information and the knowledge was not taken up seriously by the global institutions, and this also the downscaling of the data, where we say that okay, this is 2 degrees, 3 degrees, but it once comes to specific territories or specific places, because of the landscape or topography or the urban built environment, it's obvious that the consequence of climate change or opportunities of dealing with climate change is really unique. Therefore, the more we can disintegrate data, the more we can downscale, the more we can decentralize data, I think the more we can understand the climate change and its solutions and its challenges. That's, I think, why it is important to have this focus area. And the last thing is funding and finance, the role of banks, insurance companies, developers, and cost and benefits. And of course, this is the unique, exciting moment, because we all are hearing the global investment community is now shifting away from a coal-based investment portfolio. A number of banks are announcing that they're divesting. A number of sectors are already getting out of this favored sectors from the climate funds. This all creates a good opportunity that the urban sustainable development and urban climate action can now be the new frontier or the new investment niche for the global climate finance. And therefore, we have to fill all the missing points that the investments can be comfortably flying into these areas. The governance challenges, political challenges should be addressed with innovative approaches, that this climate action should be depoliticized in the sense that when it comes to climate action, we don't call liberal or conservative or progressive governments, but we all are aware, are talking about those governments who are aware of their investment portfolios that is climate sensitive and climate prioritized. So these are the 3 research areas that how this will be dealt. The next steps is that the IPCC in October in Korea will have the plenary, and this would be presented as a report, and from then onwards there will be a series of debates under the IPCC in terms of modalities. But meanwhile, there will be a special report of 1.5 degrees, and there is a special discussions on how cities can contribute to this 1.5 debate. And also the AR6 has certain chapters on cities and urban action as well. Meanwhile, after 2018, there will be a certain, let's say, medium-term activities, and this is the time where we would work with scientific research papers or journals or universities and practitioners, that more investments should be flowing to the publications, the gray data, the scientific data should meet with the local realities, so that by the time we start to prepare the spatial report on cities in 2023, we are well defined and well equipped with all the information we have in our hands. So the last slide here, as I said, this is an IPCC-led process, everything has a cost and benefit. If it is an IPCC-led process, we have to respect the decision-making in the IPCC, let's say, procedures. It's an intergovernmental process. Therefore, there is a need for a continuity of the support of the global networks. So 10 organizations, including Future Earth and ICLAI, and I don't have to count all the others, but there's a huge diversity, and most of them were logos at the beginning was presented, saying that we will continue to support this agenda through our own resources, through our own channels, our own activities. So we will promote and implement a global research agenda on cities and climate change. We will stimulate new research and produce knowledge, encourage science-based and evidence-based climate action in cities, and create and strengthen partnerships. So there will be a series of consultations in terms of the coordination of this partnership, and we're expecting to have new partners to join this, but this core locomotive networks of 10 organizations will spearhead this process, and therefore it will be good that it will be discussed in ICLAI World Congress, with Joe will address this. And the final Edmonton Declaration is also a commitment from local leaders that we endorse the 1.5 degree target. We will connect to the NDCs, especially through the Talanoa dialogues this year, and we commit to accelerate our science-based policy and decision-making. And additionally, new frontiers like consumption-based emissions will also be addressed in our climate action at the cities. So this will be an Edmonton Declaration is announced, but this will be in consultation among networks through a series of global events over the next couple of months, and regional events, including Resident Cities Congress here in Bonn. And it will be finally open for signature at ICLAI World Congress in Montreal. And it will also feed into the Global Climate Action Summit in California in September as another milestone. My last slide is all these pioneering, dedicated colleagues who have contributed to the success. The first group is a joint organizing committee and scientific committee meeting with the mayor of Edmonton and IPCC chair, Mr. Kim. The second photo is a scene from the plenary from the First Nations of the Edmonton, and I think that was a fantastic signal that the scientific and cities community do not necessarily limit themselves, but we had local indigenous people, youth gathering in this event. The last photo on the left is the announcement by 10 representatives of these 10 organizations, and this big family photo on the right is the local leaders and their senior representatives of networks who have gathered the day before of the IPCC conference to announce their support to the IPCC process. And that concludes my presentation.
Thank you, Yunus. I will now give the floor to Melissa Guardaro. Melissa will present a city research collaboration project in the city of Phoenix, the Cooler Phoenix Initiative.
Okay, good morning. Can you see my slides? Can you hear me?
Yes, we can see your slides. Thank you, Melissa.
Okay, thank you. Hold on just one moment. Okay, I'm not sure why this isn't closing. There we go. So I'm going to talk about an initiative within Phoenix, Arizona in the United States that really encapsulates all the things that we've heard thus far this morning. And for those of you who are not familiar with Phoenix, it's the 6th largest city in the United States, and it's located in the American Southwest. So we are in a desert environment, and it is hot here, and it is getting hotter. And we really need to band together to try to do something about this urban heat. So I'm going to go through the initial slides very quickly and just assume that most of you know all about urban heat. Urban heat is formed from urban heat islands, which is really dependent upon your urban form and the materials that you use, and how your city generates heat from both traffic and from buildings, and whether or not you have shading. And that can be trees, but that can also be mechanical shade. urban heat also comes from climate change, and these are the IPCC predictions for the American Southwest region. So you can see, even under the best case scenario, we still will have an increase in climate. So this is the number of days that you see how it's been heating up here in Metro Phoenix compared to the previous 20 or 30 years. And it's important to note here that the urban heat island, there isn't just one urban heat island, but rather a string of microclimates, has contributed to the warming up during the night, and the regional climate change effects have increased the temperature during the days. So I want you to just note that there are 192 days where the temperature rises above 90 degrees. And our heat relief network, the emergency network, goes into effect around 110, 120 degrees. And you can see that last year there were 25 days where we had to launch that. So this chart is an OSHA work rest schedule for people when they are outside. So as I told you before, we were at 192 days where we were above 90 degrees. And you can see, even if you're acclimated to this climate, you still cannot continuously work outside. And if you're unacclimated, this is downright dangerous. And sometimes there are disastrous consequences. Last year, we saw a huge spike in heat-associated deaths. So this is an urgent problem. And it's not just people who die. There are many people that end up in the emergency room. And there's a proxy that for every emergency room admission, there are, and I can't find that number right now, but let's just say there are 1,000 other people who have had some sort of heat-associated illness. The bars in yellow on this graph are when the heat relief network has been put into place. So you can see it's not only just during these heat waves, but also there's a lag effect that we have a lot of public health issues. And these are the other impacts of urban heat: increased water use, it costs a lot more, public health effects, energy demand. And we in the metro area of Phoenix are really trying to figure out, how are we going to tackle this? It's really obvious that no one organization is going to be able to tackle this by themselves. So how do we come up with science-based, informed solutions that work on the ground, on the ground, to provide greater thermal comfort for our citizens? So this is our Cooler Phoenix work plan. And as you can see, it involves education, industry, community, and governments. And this is really that there are different places where different sectors can insert themselves, but here you can see that this whole process is progressive and it's iterative. And it involves evolving partnerships to help solve our problem. So how we tackle this in Metro Phoenix is that there was a core City of Phoenix team and a core ASU team that got together to think, now how are we going to go about and make sure that within the City of Phoenix, all of the different departments really embrace putting in cooler materials, making sure that there's shade for people. So we came up with a series of principles, and in the interest of time, I will just go through them very quickly. The first principle is that we need to maximize thermal comfort and cooling and minimize energy and water use. And this speaks to how a lot of these solution sets are contextually driven, because you can't just say plant trees in our desert environment. The water usage required for that would make that impractical. So there's a balance there. And that there's not one urban heat island. There are many different urban heat islands. So there's not uniform impact across our region. So then therefore we need to prioritize. We need to prioritize the hottest areas of our city and vulnerable populations. And this speaks to Eunice's presentation about inclusion and social transformation. You'll see a lot of these points in our priorities. We also want to enhance shade where people are. It's one thing to have a hot area of the city, but if people are not outside and being exposed, let's prioritize to where people are as they're walking to bus routes, as they're waiting outside for public spaces. and develop cool islands. And these would be sanctuaries within the city. And they don't need to be extraordinarily large parks, but rather just places that would provide cooling for people as they're moving throughout their days. And the last two priorities point to the fact that let's build it better from the beginning. So let's influence projects in the design stage. Let's incorporate cooling guidelines into any zoning and design revisions that might come along. And lastly, broad public support is necessary. So the City of Phoenix and the ASU core team got together and we did a brainstorming and an inventory of what we did right, what we perhaps could do better, what we shouldn't be doing anymore. And from there, we came up with a set of priorities within city management as to projects that we could really influence and add cooling features to. So this is a real practical application of ASU researchers advising the City of Phoenix departments. And to augment that, we also had a group of ASU researchers that are leaders in their field in heat research and heat mitigation give a presentation to the City of Phoenix heads. And this was about 18 people who did rapid fire presentations about the cutting edge research that's available out there. We then broke into special teams, and in the interest of time, I'm just going to focus on the housing team. In the City of Phoenix, there is a huge neighborhood revitalization project going on, and it's part of Housing and Urban Development Choice Neighborhoods grants. And ASU researchers got together and advised both the city and the architect on how to influence thermal comfort within that neighborhood revitalization. And it was very interesting. Some of them really did not require a lot of extra money. It's just a matter of reorienting buildings to take advantage of wind flow and shading so that you can make it more comfortable for this neighborhood. The other thing that having an ongoing city and university partnership has allowed us to do is to apply for special projects. And we are one of the 30 cities that have been awarded the Bloomberg Mayor's Challenge. And this is for our heat ready work. And there are over 2,000 cities within the United States that have qualified for storm ready certification, but there is no heat ready certification. And this is what we're trying to build with NOAA and the National Weather Service that would prioritize cooling features throughout the city. There would be an emergency platform for people to understand where they need to go in places of emergency, and would just provide an overall certification project, an overall certification process, so that cities would be able to avoid some of the public health consequences of heat waves. And that's certainly dangerous here in the United States and around the world. The second part is that we are also part of the Harvard Bloomberg City Leadership Initiative. And last week, we had a core group of people go that represented industry, the university, utilities, the city, and foundations within our city to see how we can bring all these broad stakeholders together to help solve the problem of urban heat. So this is basically our workflow right now, and we are moving forward so that this is a multi-stakeholder collaborative effort, and these efforts take time because you can move only at the speed of trust. And I've been listening to the other presenters talk about university-city collaborations, and I have to tell you that I know that this collaboration will be able to produce incredible results that the city alone would not be able to do. Thank you.
Thank you, Melissa. I will finally give the floor to Joseph Bladkowski, our head of the ICLEI Capacity Center, who will speak about the opportunities for citizen research to meet and collaborate at the ICLEI World Congress.
Great, thank you, Victoria. So actually, I'd like to thank all of the other presenters and panelists that have spoken before me, because you've made my job actually incredibly easy. Because after hearing all of these presentations, the first thought I have is, well, I want to know more and I want to hear more and find out what other cities are doing as well. And the answer for that is you can attend the ICLEI World Congress 2018 this June in Montreal. And the World Congress is our triannual event where we as the ICLEI network bring as many of our members and network cities and regions together with other stakeholders and partners that we work with on sustainable urban development to exchange on cases of good practice on what's happening both on the global level as well as locally in sustainable urban development. And of course, one of these key stakeholders is the science, research, knowledge community. So we've tailored the program around this community as well, specifically looking to bring research practitioners together with policymakers to collectively share and exchange on their knowledge, what they have at their disposal, and how this can be brought together to drive forward sustainable urban development, both today and also in the future, very much in line with what Melissa has shown in the case of Phoenix, and Lisa was talking about what we're seeing in the case of Montreal from Andre's presentation, and of course what Eunice was showcasing from the global agenda. So over the 4-day event, from the 19th to the 22nd, we will have a dedicated pre-event before the official opening of the Congress on Tuesday morning, which I'll go into momentarily. And in addition to that, throughout the Congress, we will have research brought in the sessions in, not to have them in isolated sessions where researchers would be discussing amongst themselves, but rather fully integrated with the local government representatives, with business partners, with national government representatives, to make sure that all of these stakeholders are actively discussing how things can be, partnerships can be developed and action can be taken forward together in a collaborative way. So specifically for the morning on Tuesday, we're still finalizing the program here, but 3 of the key areas I think we will be addressing, very much in line with today's webinar, is first looking at city and research networks and how we can leverage this global knowledge for sustainable urban development. And in addition to that, looking at specific cases of good practice where municipal and research partnerships have been quite fruitful and driven action forward very effectively. And finally, one thing we touched a little, we looked at a bit today, especially in the last presentation from Melissa, is also increasing and strengthening the local research and knowledge capacity of municipalities. Some examples of how this can be done are with partnerships through universities within the jurisdictions of municipalities, but also, as we've seen in some cases within the ICLEI network, municipalities who have developed or established their own municipal think tank to further increase this capacity to help them in the decision-making processes. So in addition to that, throughout the Congress, again in the sessions, we'll be bringing in expert knowledge together with policymakers to present the work that's being done and to exchange and debate on the directions that the Sustainable Urban Development Agenda can go forward. And also in our in a key session we'll have on Tuesday afternoon in our multi-stakeholder dialogue, we'll be looking at having very active debates on some of the key questions and challenges in sustainability. And here again, science and research representatives will be one of the key groups that we'll want to have actively discussing together with other partners to showcase what science, what knowledge and research can bring to the table and really help drive these challenges forward. Then, if you also want to know a bit more about what Montreal has done, I think Andres highlighted a couple of good cases, and Montreal as a city has been working with research and its universities for quite a bit of time in its work. And on Thursday afternoon, we'll have a number of technical site visits looking at various projects that Montreal has done, many of which have a very active and robust multi-stakeholder approach to how they were planned and implemented, with research and the science and knowledge communities being one of these key stakeholders. So that will also be a big opportunity to showcase that work. So to wrap it up quickly and hopefully have time for some questions, Again, if you are as excited as I am to hear more about what science and research are bringing to the table with local and regional governments, please visit worldcongress2018.eclid.org, or you can contact us at world.congress@eclid.org. Register today, and we look forward to welcoming you in Montreal in June. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Joe. We don't have a lot of time. We already surpassed the time that we had planned for the webinar. However, there is this recurrent question that maybe one of our presenters would like to address, which is how do we involve the civil society in this co-creation of policies and the creation and presentation of data? I don't know if one of the presenters would like to answer this question.
What I can very briefly, because of the time, but I would be more interested if Andres is still here so that he can give the concrete case from Montreal. But we are working with WWF, the World Wildlife Fund, which started with the Earth Our City Challenge, which now turns into One Planet Challenge. And in that sense, the cities are not boarded by only 1 hour in one night, but throughout the year, they report their actions, they show their commitments, and the citizens rate or vote for their best choices, and then this is the champion of the One Planet is announced. I think this is a good example that ICLEI has been conducting. We are helping the cities to report their climate information through our registry, and having a scrutiny and having a recognition from a civil society is really bringing us closer to the citizens and the local governments. But this is one example only.
I don't know if Andres or Melissa, maybe in your city cases, would you have any examples or experiences on how to involve the civil society?
For us, we're working in a collaboration around urban heat with the Nature Conservancy and community groups to have three different neighborhoods within Metro Phoenix help design their own heat action plan. So it's very empowering for the residents, and it's very much directed to their own neighborhoods and how they would design both an emergency plan and a long-term plan to provide greater thermal comfort for their people, for their other neighbors, especially when it's really hot outside. The Nature Conservancy project, that is a collaboration between the City of Phoenix, Arizona State University, the county level, Maricopa County Department of Health, and it's also working at the regional level. And we're working with the Active Transportation Committee in their redesign of active transportation plans, so that you can't necessarily be active outside if it's too hot and you are putting yourself at risk. So we are inserting science-based research into the active transportation plans going forward. So I think it's a matter of really developing relationships, and I spoke briefly about moving at the speed of trust. And what I'm finding is that we may be called in for one specific piece, but that has mushroomed out so that we have a greater influence along a lot of different stakeholders. And I'm speaking for ASU. Our university has also designated one person, that would happen to be me, to coordinate all the researchers having to do with urban heat at our university, so that if you are part of a city government or a foundation and you're looking to do something that you require some science-based knowledge, that you just need to contact one person rather than relying on relationships with individual professors. And that seems to have worked really well to help address that time issue, where there's the university time scale and then there's the city time scale. That seems to have really helped move that process forward quickly.
Hi.
Yes, thank you, Andres. Thank you, Melissa. Yes, Andres, we listen to you.
Yes, I want to say that in Montreal, after that we have identified the hazard climates, we have made a vulnerability geographic, and we have published all the mapping of destructive storm, heat waves, droughts, river floods, all the hazard, and this is a way to inform the society. But we can, each municipality works and it's committed to informate the community. So this is a way to work with the community.
Thank you, Andres. Melissa? Melissa Colbert?
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Victoria. I thought I'd also jump in here. My audio dropped a little bit, so I didn't hear the first part of that question, but in relation to how civil society can get involved in sort of broader communities within society, I just wanted to highlight again that example of the PrEP data case that I showed in my slides. That data is open. So I highlighted it in relation to how sort of local and national governments can take advantage of building those scenario and visualizations, but this is also something, it's a tool that civil society organizations can also use to develop scenarios and visualizations around some of the impacts that they would like to have, and use that data to support some of the interventions or programming that they're working around in supporting that side of this whole sustainability sphere that we're in. So I think these open data platforms are a really innovative way of including those communities as well within this.
Thank you all for your answers. There are other few questions that are really targeted to some of the different organizations that you're a part of, and what I would do is to send them to you, and maybe you could answer to these questions later in the day or within this week. And since we don't have more time to continue, but before we finish, I would like to invite you to register to the Congress. You can do it through our website, as Joe said, at worldcongress2018.eclay.org. And if you have any questions, please contact us at world.congress@eclay.org. And the presentations and the recording of this webinar will soon be available on our website. And finally, please stay tuned and register to our next webinar, Cities with Nature, that will take place at the end of April. Thank you all, and see you next time. Bye-bye.